What if one of the strangest ideas associated with the Book of Enoch was never actually about another planet at all? What if the mystery begins with a mountain, an ancient oath, and a story about beings who were said to cross a boundary between heaven and humanity? The Book of Enoch does not contain a straightforward sentence saying there is a second Earth connected to ours by a bridge. That claim belongs to a much more modern interpretation, but something genuinely extraordinary is hiding underneath it. In one of the oldest sections of Book of Enoch, a group of 200 heavenly beings descends to Earth, gathers on the summit of Mount Hermon, swears an oath together, and then begins an act of rebellion that changes the course of the story. For centuries, readers have asked a simple question. What exactly did the ancient author mean by these beings descending from heaven? Were they angels in the theological sense? Were they symbolic representations of human corruption? Were they mythological beings inherited from older Near Eastern traditions? Or was the author imagining a universe whose boundaries between different realms were far more complicated than the simple picture most modern readers have in their minds? That last possibility is where the modern second Earth theory begins. But to understand it, we have to separate the ancient text from the modern speculation surrounding it. Because when we do, the real story becomes more interesting, not less. The Book of Enoch, more precisely called Warren Enoch, is not a single work written by one person at one moment in history. It is a collection of several Jewish writings composed and compiled over centuries. Among its oldest sections is the Book of Watchers, chapters 1 through 36. Portions of this material were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls in Aramaic, proving that traditions associated with Enoch were circulating in the Second Temple period, long before the surviving medieval Ethiopian manuscripts were produced. The complete text survives in Ge'ez, the classical language of Ethiopia, while Greek and Aramaic witnesses preserve substantial but incomplete portions. That manuscript history matters because one of the most common claims surrounding Enoch is that the original book was deliberately hidden, and that modern translations secretly remove entire sections describing another Earth. The evidence does not support that. There are damaged passages, textual variations, missing fragments, and complicated translation histories. But that is very different from having a complete ancient chapter describing a dimensional bridge, and then having scholars deliberately erase it. The actual Book of Watchers contains something remarkable enough without inventing material. It begins with Enoch describing visions concerning the heavenly world, judgment, the Watchers, humanity, and the fate of the rebellious beings. The story eventually reaches Genesis chapter 6, where the mysterious sons of God take human women and produce extraordinary offspring. Genesis gives the story only a few verses. Warren Enoch expands it dramatically. According to 1 Enoch 6, the Watchers see the daughters of men and desire them. Their leader, commonly rendered as Semjaza or Shemyaza, fears that he alone will bear the punishment if the group proceeds. So the Watchers make an agreement. They swear together that none of them will abandon the plan. Then comes one of the most important geographical details in the entire story. They descend on the summit of Mount Hermon. The text says there were 200 of them, and the mountain is directly connected to their oath. This is not a modern interpolation. Mount Hermon genuinely appears in the ancient Enochic tradition. That single detail has generated centuries of speculation. Why Mount Hermon? Why not Jerusalem? Why not Sinai? Why not an imaginary mountain somewhere beyond the human world? Why does an ancient Jewish apocalypse place the rebellion of the Watchers on a real mountain in the Levant? Mount Hermon is not an ordinary geographical landmark. It rises dramatically in the anti-Lebanon mountain system and reaches roughly 2,814 meters at its highest point. Modern geological research describes it as a major limestone mountain with an extensive karst system where rain and snowmelt enter the rock and feed springs across the surrounding region. For ancient communities, mountains were natural places for encounters between the human and divine worlds. That idea was not unique to Enoch. Across the ancient Near East, high places could function as sacred spaces, places where the boundary between earth and heaven seemed symbolically thinner. Mountains were associated with gods, temples, revelation, storms, sacred oaths, and divine encounters. Hermon fits naturally into that world. The mountain was known by several names in antiquity. Biblical traditions connect it with names such as Syrian and Senir, while its broader geographical identity appears in ancient Near Eastern sources. Its enormous elevation, snow, and position at the meeting point of several regions made it visually and culturally significant. And there is another reason modern readers find Hermon so intriguing: water. Mount Hermon is a major recharge zone for the region. Snow and rainfall infiltrate its fractured limestone and karst network, eventually feeding springs and river systems. Modern hydrological studies have demonstrated that the mountain contributes significantly to the sources of the Jordan River and also supplies groundwater and springs flowing toward areas of Syria and Lebanon. So when an ancient writer chooses Hermon as the location where heavenly beings enter the human story, The choice is geographically meaningful. But meaningful does not automatically mean dimensional. That distinction is essential. The competitor narrative takes the real Enoch passage and then adds a second layer. It claims that an Ethiopian section before chapter 6 describes two simultaneously existing Earths, separated by something like a thin cloth, with Mount Hermon acting as the place where the two surfaces touch. It even claims that certain Western translations remove descriptions of 7 physical markers, identifying the gateway. The surviving evidence does not establish this. The uploaded competitor script itself makes those assertions, including the alleged cloth between the two orders and the supposed 7 markers. But the textual evidence available from the Book of Watchers does not give us a hidden chapter explaining a parallel Earth connected through Mount Hermon, and that is precisely where the story becomes more fascinating, because the ancient author was already imagining multiple levels of reality. He was not thinking about a modern multiverse in the language of particle physics. He was writing within an ancient Jewish cosmological framework in which heaven, earth, celestial beings, angels, spirits, and other realms could interact. In the Book of Watchers, Enoch himself is taken on extraordinary journeys. He sees places that are inaccessible to ordinary human beings. He encounters angels. He is shown cosmic structures. He travels to the ends of the earth. He observes astronomical phenomena. He is given visions of judgment and future events. The universe of Warren Enoch is therefore not flat or spiritually simple. It is layered. But a layered ancient cosmos is not the same thing as a parallel universe theory. This difference is often lost when ancient religious texts are compared with modern physics. A person reading Enoch today may hear about heavenly beings crossing into the human world and immediately think of dimensions, portals, brains, wormholes, or parallel universes. An ancient reader would not necessarily have made any of those connections. For the ancient author, the central issue was not how to construct a physical gateway between universes. The central issue was the boundary between divine and human existence, and the Watchers violate that boundary. That violation is the heart of the story. The Watchers do not merely appear on Earth. They interact with human beings. They take wives, they produce offspring, they teach forbidden knowledge, and according to the Enochic narrative, the consequences become catastrophic. This is where another famous figure enters the story, Azazel. In 1st Enoch, the Watchers are associated with teaching humanity different forms of knowledge that the author considers destructive. Azazel is especially associated with metalworking and weapons, while other Watchers teach forms of magic, astrology, cosmetics, and other practices. The story is not a celebration of advanced knowledge. It is a warning. The problem is not that humanity learns. The problem is that knowledge arrives through a transgression of cosmic boundaries and becomes associated with violence, corruption, and exploitation. This is one reason the Watcher's story became so influential. It provides an explanation for why evil and forbidden knowledge became embedded in human society. Genesis 6 leaves the identity and behavior of the sons of God mysterious. Enoch fills in the missing story. The heavenly beings saw human women. They desired them. They descended. They took wives. They taught forbidden arts. Their offspring became associated with violence, and divine judgment followed. The mountain where they swear their oath therefore becomes a symbolically charged location. It is the place where the boundary is crossed. That fact alone can explain why modern readers describe Hermon as a gateway. But there is another question. Why does the title of our story say Second Earth? Because there really is a concept in modern cosmology that sounds strangely similar to some aspects of the ancient imagination. It is called brain cosmology. In some theories inspired by string theory and higher dimensional physics, our observable universe can be modeled as a lower dimensional surface embedded in a higher dimensional space. The word brain is short for membrane. The important point is that these models allow physicists to consider the possibility of other brains existing within a higher dimensional framework. That sounds almost like another universe sitting beside ours. But the similarities stop there. Physics does not say that another Earth has been discovered. It does not say that another human civilization exists on a neighboring brain. It does not identify Mount Hermon as a portal. And it does not provide evidence that the Book of Enoch anticipated string theory. Brain models remain theoretical frameworks, and experimental evidence for large extra dimensions or parallel brains has not been established. This is where responsible interpretation matters. The interesting question is not, did Enoch secretly discover modern physics? There is no evidence for that. The interesting question is, why does an ancient text describing contact between different orders of reality feel so familiar to modern people living in an age of higher dimensional physics? Part of the answer is that human beings have always struggled to imagine what lies beyond ordinary perception. Ancient cultures used heavens, underworlds, divine realms, sacred mountains, cosmic oceans, and invisible beings. Modern science uses space-time, extra dimensions, quantum fields, dark matter, and mathematical spaces that cannot be visualized directly. The vocabulary changes. The human curiosity does not. And this is where Mount Hermon becomes particularly powerful as a symbol. A mountain literally rises from one world into another visual realm. Its summit can disappear into cloud. Snow can remain on its upper slopes while warmer landscapes exist below. Water enters the mountain and emerges elsewhere as springs. From a human perspective, a mountain is a perfect natural image for a boundary between worlds. Ancient people did not need modern physics to recognize that. The geography itself provided the metaphor. And Enoch uses that geography in a very specific way. The Watchers descend on Hermon. They swear an oath. They violate the separation between heavenly beings and humans. The result is corruption. This is the actual sequence. There's no need to insert a missing portal. The story already has a bridge, but it is a conceptual bridge. It connects heaven and earth through forbidden contact, and that may be more important than the modern portal theory. Consider what happens next. The Watchers' actions create a crisis so severe that divine judgment is required. The earth becomes corrupted. Violence spreads. The giants become destructive. Humanity suffers. The angels Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel become involved in the response. The rebellious Watchers are condemned. Azazel is singled out for punishment, and the coming flood becomes part of the larger solution to the corruption. In this way, Enoch expands the Genesis flood story into a cosmic conflict. The flood is no longer simply a story about human wickedness. It becomes the consequence of a violation that began when heavenly beings crossed into the human realm. That is the real bridge in Enoch. It is a bridge between categories of existence that the author believes should remain separate. And this is why Mount Hermon matters. The mountain is where the Watchers commit themselves to crossing that boundary. The text even connects the mountain's name with their oath. In the surviving tradition, Hermon is associated with the act of swearing and binding themselves together. That is a remarkable piece of literary geography. The place itself becomes permanently connected to the event. But was the mountain historically believed to contain a literal gateway? We cannot establish that from more Enoch. There are later traditions, interpretations, religious speculations, and modern theories that build upon the location. But the primary text does not give us a technical description of a portal. It does not describe two Earths orbiting beside each other. It does not describe a membrane. It does not describe a dimensional tunnel. It does not describe scientists discovering energy leaking from another universe. Those ideas belong to later interpretation. And once we remove them, something else becomes visible. The Book of Enoch is actually much stranger than the modern conspiracy version, because its author believed the universe was populated by beings whose actions could directly affect human history. He believed that knowledge could cross boundaries. He believed that celestial beings could descend. He believed that the structure of the cosmos could be revealed through visions. And he believed that hidden realities existed beyond ordinary human experience. For a modern audience, that is already extraordinary. Then there's the manuscript history. The complete text survived in Ethiopia, while fragments of its older Aramaic form were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. The discovery of these fragments was important because it demonstrated that Enochic literature was not a medieval Ethiopian invention. The traditions were genuinely ancient and circulated in Jewish communities during the Second Temple period. This changes the story considerably. Before the Dead Sea Scrolls, critics could have dismissed many details as later additions, but Qumran provided physical evidence that portions of Enoch were already being copied centuries before Christianity. Several Aramaic manuscripts from Cave 4 preserve sections of the Book of Watchers and other Enochic works. That means the Watcher story is ancient. The Mount Hermon connection is ancient. The 200 Watchers are ancient. The oath is ancient. The problem is that none of this proves a second physical Earth. It proves something else. It proves that ancient Jewish thinkers were constructing elaborate explanations for the relationship between humanity and invisible realms. And perhaps this is where the modern question should change. Instead of asking whether Enoch discovered another Earth, ask what the ancient author meant by another realm. The answer appears to be a cosmos with multiple orders of existence. Heaven is not simply a distant location in outer space. It is another level of reality. Angels belong to that level. God belongs to an even higher order. Human beings occupy Earth, and the Watchers violate the intended separation. This is very different from a modern multiverse. Yet there is a fascinating conceptual resemblance. Both frameworks challenge the assumption that everything that exists must be directly visible from our ordinary perspective. Modern physics has repeatedly demonstrated that reality is stranger than human senses suggest. We cannot see electromagnetic fields directly. We cannot see space-time curvature with our eyes. We cannot observe quantum fields in the ordinary sense. Scientists infer their existence through measurable effects. But this does not mean every invisible thing proposed by ancient religion therefore exists. That distinction is crucial. Science and ancient mythology can ask similar questions without producing the same answers. The competitor script also connects Enoch to CERN and the idea that missing energy might indicate particles escaping into another brain. That is an intriguing science fiction analogy, but it is not established evidence. The Large Hadron Collider does conduct searches relevant to theories beyond the Standard Model, including scenarios involving extra dimensions. But no confirmed observation has demonstrated that energy disappearing from experiments is evidence of an adjacent Earth. The theoretical possibility of extra dimensions is not the same as experimental confirmation of a second world. And this distinction actually makes the mystery stronger. Because there is a genuine scientific question here. What is the full structure of reality? Physicists do not yet know. We know the observable universe is vast. We know general relativity describes gravity as the geometry of space-time. We know quantum mechanics describes the behavior of matter and energy at microscopic scales. We know these theories do not yet form one complete description of nature. And physicists have proposed extra dimensions, multiverse scenarios, brains, quantum gravity models, and other possibilities in attempts to understand what lies beyond our current framework. But possibility is not proof. The same principle applies to Enoch. A text can describe a mysterious heavenly realm without being a physics textbook. And a physics theory can mathematically permit neighboring structures without proving that an ancient mountain is a doorway. There is another fascinating feature of Hermann that helps explain why the mountain remained important. Its physical geography is unusual. The mountain receives substantial winter precipitation, much of it is snow at higher elevations. Its limestone formations allow water to penetrate underground, where the karst system transports it toward springs. Modern studies have shown that the Hermann Aquifer contributes water to drainage systems on multiple sides of the mountain. For ancient observers, that would have been remarkable. A mountain covered in snow becomes a source of water. Water disappears into rock and emerges somewhere else. Streams begin from springs that seem to emerge from beneath the earth. A mountain can therefore appear to connect hidden and visible worlds. That may help explain why sacred traditions repeatedly attached supernatural meaning to high mountains. But we should not confuse an ancient perception with a scientific anomaly. There is nothing physically impossible about Hermann's hydrology. It is explained by geology, precipitation, snowmelt, groundwater flow, and karst processes. The mystery is cultural, not necessarily supernatural, and that distinction gives us a much stronger story, because the real mystery is why the author of 1st Enoch chose this particular landscape for one of the most important supernatural events in his narrative. Maybe it was because Hermann already carried religious significance. Maybe the mountain was connected with older traditions about divine beings. Maybe its geographic prominence made it ideal for a story about beings descending from heaven. Maybe the author inherited a tradition in which Hermann was already associated with the divine realm. Or perhaps several of those factors came together. Scholars have long recognized that Enochic literature draws upon older biblical and Near Eastern traditions and transforms them into new apocalyptic narratives. The Watcher's story itself is an expanded interpretation of Genesis 6. Genesis gives us the mysterious sons of God. Enoch gives them names, leaders, motives, actions, punishments, and consequences. That is not accidental. The author is taking an obscure biblical passage and building an entire cosmic explanation around it. And once you understand that, the importance of Hermann becomes clearer. It is the stage on which the expansion begins. The Watchers gather there. They swear there. They descend there. And from that moment, the boundary between heaven and earth is violated. That is why the mountain becomes central to the story. Not because the text gives us coordinates to a dimensional portal, because the mountain represents the moment when two orders of existence interact. This also explains why the modern second earth interpretation is so seductive. The ancient text gives us the ingredients: a heavenly population, a real mountain, a descent, a crossing, a boundary between realms, and a catastrophic consequence. Modern readers naturally translate those ingredients into modern concepts. The heavenly realm becomes another universe. The descent becomes dimensional travel. The mountain becomes a portal. The boundary becomes a membrane. The Watchers become visitors from another world. But that translation is ours. It is not the ancient author's vocabulary. And that does not make the interpretation useless. It simply means we should label it honestly. It is a modern speculative reading of an ancient text. There's a second problem with the idea that the Church secretly removed a complete second earth chapter. The history of Enoch's reception is complicated. First, Enoch was influential in some early Jewish and Christian circles. The New Testament letter of Jude famously quotes material attributed to Enoch. The book was preserved in Ethiopia and eventually became part of the Ethiopian Orthodox biblical tradition. But there was never a single moment when one universal Christian authority gathered all manuscripts of Enoch, deleted the same passages, and hid them from the world. Different Christian communities developed different canons. The Book of Enoch was preserved in Ethiopia while becoming less central in most other Christian traditions. That is a history of canon formation and transmission, not proof of a coordinated suppression of dimensional physics. The same is true of the Council of Laodicea. The competitor script presents the council as if it simply removed Enoch from accepted scripture in a deliberate suppression campaign. But the historical development of biblical canons was gradual and complex, and the surviving evidence does not support the dramatic claim that Laodicea deleted a secret Mount Hermon portal chapter. The actual history is more complicated than the conspiracy, and in many ways, it is more interesting. A book can disappear from one tradition while surviving in another. A text can survive in fragments. A translation can preserve one reading, while another manuscript preserves a different reading. Scholars can reconstruct older forms from thousands of damaged pieces. That is exactly what happened with Enoch. The Aramaic fragments at Qumran gave scholars an ancient window into the text. The Greek fragments supplied additional evidence. The Ethiopian manuscripts preserved the complete literary work. And modern scholars compare these witnesses to reconstruct the history of the tradition. This is not the disappearance of knowledge. It is the recovery of knowledge. And perhaps the greatest irony is that the genuine discovery is already dramatic enough. The Book of Enoch was not simply a medieval fantasy. Its traditions are genuinely ancient. Its Watcher story was circulating long before the modern world existed. Its Mount Hermon episode is preserved in ancient textual witnesses, and its cosmology reveals a Jewish worldview in which heaven and earth could interact in ways that later readers would find astonishing. So is there a second Earth? According to modern science, we have no evidence that there is a parallel Earth adjacent to ours. According to Worship Enoch, there is no clear description of such a planet connected to ours by a physical bridge, but there is a deeper sense in which the title of this story captures something real. The Enochic universe contains another order of existence. It is close enough to affect humanity. Its inhabitants can cross into the human realm, and the consequences of that crossing become one of the most important stories in the entire work. The bridge, therefore, is not something we can locate on a satellite map. It is the boundary between realms. Mount Hermon becomes the place where that boundary is violated. And once that happens, the ancient story says the world can never be the same. The Watchers do not return humanity to innocence. They leave knowledge behind. They leave violence behind. They leave offspring behind. And they leave behind a warning about what happens when beings cross boundaries they were never supposed to cross. That warning may sound surprisingly modern. Today, humanity constantly crosses boundaries. We manipulate genes. We create artificial intelligence. We build machines capable of altering the environment. We send instruments beyond the planets. We manipulate matter at extraordinary energies. The question is no longer simply whether knowledge can be obtained. It is whether every form of knowledge should be used simply because it can be obtained. That is exactly the moral tension at the heart of the Watcher's story. The ancient author was not warning humanity about particle accelerators. He was not predicting artificial intelligence. He was not describing nuclear weapons. But he was exploring a timeless question. What happens when forbidden knowledge escapes its original boundary and becomes part of human civilization? That question gives the story its enduring power, and it gives Mount Hermon a meaning far more profound than the claim that it hides a secret portal. The mountain becomes a symbol of contact, a place where heaven and earth meet in the imagination of an ancient writer, a real mountain carrying real snow, real water, real geology, and real archaeological history, but also a mountain carrying thousands of years of religious memory. That combination is what makes Hermon fascinating. It does not need a dimensional gateway to be mysterious. It already sits at the intersection of geography, mythology, religion, archaeology, and history. And perhaps the strangest part is that we can still see the mountain today. The landscape has changed, borders have changed, religions have changed, empires have disappeared, but Hermon remains. Its snow still feeds the hydrological system of the region. Its limestone still stores groundwater. Its slopes still form part of a strategically sensitive region. And the ancient words associated with its summit still survive in manuscripts copied long after the original authors were gone. The Watchers are still there too, at least in the pages of Enoch. 200 beings, one mountain, one oath, one forbidden crossing, and an entire cosmic catastrophe that follows. So when someone says that the Book of Enoch describes a second Earth and a bridge connecting it to ours, the most responsible response is not simply to accept the claim or dismiss the entire story. Look deeper. The literal second Earth is not established by the surviving text. The physical bridge is not established. The hidden Ethiopian chapter describing a dimensional membrane is not supported by the textual evidence. The connection to CERN is speculative. Brain cosmology does not prove Enoch was describing modern physics, but the ancient mystery underneath all of those claims is real. Where Enoch genuinely describes heavenly beings crossing into the human world. It genuinely places their oath on Mount Hermon. It genuinely presents a universe in which multiple orders of existence interact. It genuinely preserves one of the ancient world's most elaborate explanations for the mysterious beings of Genesis 6. And it genuinely survived through a remarkable chain of transmission from the ancient Jewish world to Qumran, through Greek and Ethiopic traditions, and eventually into modern scholarship. Maybe that is the bridge we should be looking at. Not a tunnel hidden beneath a military zone, not a portal waiting for the right temperature, not an invisible doorway between two planets, but a bridge between ancient imagination and modern questions. The ancient author looked upward and asked what existed beyond the human world. Modern physicists look outward and ask whether our observable universe represents the whole of reality. The questions are separated by thousands of years. The methods could not be more different, yet both begin with the same realization. What we can see may not be everything that exists. That does not mean every ancient vision was scientifically correct. It does not mean every modern theory will prove true. It means the mystery remains open. And perhaps that is why the story of Enoch continues to fascinate people, because buried inside an ancient account of angels, giants, forbidden knowledge, judgment, and a mountain oath is a question that humanity still has not answered. Where does our reality end? Does it end at the limits of our senses? Does it end at the edge of the observable universe? Could there be dimensions we cannot perceive? Could there be structures of reality that our current instruments have not yet revealed? Science can investigate some of these possibilities. Ancient texts can show us how earlier civilizations imagined them, but neither should be forced to say what the evidence does not support. The Book of Enoch does not give us a map to a second Earth. What it gives us is something different, a map of an ancient mind trying to understand a universe far larger, stranger, and more layered than ordinary human experience. And at the center of that map stands Mount Hermon, a real mountain, a sacred mountain, a mountain associated with an oath, a mountain where, according to an ancient Jewish text, 200 heavenly watchers descended and began a chain of events that would eventually lead to judgment. Whether you understand those watchers as angels, mythological beings, theological symbols, or something else entirely, one fact remains. The story was powerful enough to survive for thousands of years. And perhaps the real mystery is not whether a second Earth is hiding behind Mount Hermon. Perhaps the real mystery is why an ancient author felt the need to imagine another order of reality at all. What did they believe was waiting beyond the visible world? Why did they believe that boundary could be crossed? And why did they choose this mountain? We may never know exactly what the original author had in mind, but the manuscript survives, the mountain survives, the questions survive. And sometimes, the most fascinating ancient mysteries are not the ones that give us impossible answers. They are the ones that force us to ask better questions. If you enjoyed this exploration of the Book of Enoch, Mount Hermon, the Watchers, and the ancient ideas about hidden realms, make sure to subscribe to the channel. More forgotten texts, ancient mysteries, and extraordinary historical traditions are coming, and some of them raise questions that are even harder to explain.